he's in his final form. Here is this homunculus. He's daring you to feel empathy, let him off the hook, try to understand. For something like the Laramie Project, I was not only playing a real person, I was actually speaking their specific direct recorded words. So that's a whole other ball of wax. For something like Bobby, it was a composite character anyway. There's documentary evidence about the night of the killing of Robert Kennedy. But there's a little bit more leeway to play inside of that because the specific character that I was playing wasn't famous enough for anybody to have like I don't believe it. And Dunch would be somewhere in between those two things. People have a general sense, if they listen to the podcast or they remember the headlines, a general sense of like this guy and the horrible things that he did, but there's not such a clear public perception of the character. It's the impossibility of something like playing Lincoln. There's no documentary evidence of Lincoln and how he spoke, how he walked, how he talked, but we all sort of have this conception of what that should be. It's not quite as tricky as playing someone who's like really popularly famous, but you have to be mindful of the fact that a real person exists and people have a preconception of who that person is.
A nightmare. I woke up in a nightmare.
I was sore. I hurt. I was worse.
Couldn't move. I was crying. And the pain?
I'd never
I walk with a limp.
felt pain like that before.
First thing that went through my mind.
And no one could tell me what was wrong with me.
What's he done to me?
I miss her.
I can't play with my children like I used to.
She was a very,
I have a feeding tube attached to me with a bag.
very good woman. That's all I can say.
I wish I could go back to the days before I met Christopher Dunch.
There was a lot of debate about whether to put that shot at the top. Do you undercut the drama of what's to come when you foreshadow where we end? And I think Patrick was right that the answer is no, because the journey is the destination. Everybody knows if you spend 5 minutes Googling, you know that he's in jail. So I think it was the right choice, and you still don't know what you're in for on the way to getting him there. It's still, I think, a much wilder journey than you could possibly imagine. It is not a linear path from we meet this man, he does these things, he goes on trial. I think it was a wise choice to put it there. And, I wanted to, I even though I didn't think it was going to live right there, I wanted to do that. One, so the lens is us, right? We are the audience. We're watching this story and any story. And it is off-putting when somebody looks you directly in the eye for any long period of time. And it also speaks to the place that he's in that moment. There is a lot going on with him. And I think it speaks to the psychology of somebody who is both desperate for connection and absolution, but totally incapable of understanding how to achieve that, and at the same time disgusted by himself for wanting it. And so I thought it was a great way to challenge the audience with that shot. He's in his final form. Here is this homunculus. He's daring you to feel empathy, let him off the hook, try to understand. I wanted it to be challenging and off-putting, to force the audience immediately into being like, oh God, he's looking right at me. What do I feel in this moment? How am I supposed to react?
Sir, there's a lot of bleeding.
Focus on your job.
How is the patient?
Perfect. There's a hemorrhage here, you need to fix it.
So there were no complications?
I don't have complications.
I can't make sense of this. It's like he knew what he was supposed to do. Then he did the exact opposite.
He's either the most incompetent surgeon I've ever crossed paths with, or he's a sociopath.
When Patrick McManus first approached me, they were quite deep in the process. So there was not only the podcast, which was pre-existing the show, they had already written all their scripts, they had their lookbook, and most importantly for me, they had all of their research material done. So When he first came to me, it was, you know, take a look at this, but also if you're interested, here's the whole universe of what this story is. Read some stuff, listen to some stuff, come back to me, and then I'll tell you my take on both this guy and the story that we're trying to tell. So it was probably the most developed thing I've ever come onto, right? With the amount of work that they'd already put in and the amount of research that was available. The first probably 2 months that I was, after I'd signed on, the first couple months that I was working on it and really diving into the research materials that Patrick had provided me, I was still very much, it was hard for me to let go of my judgments of the character. And then when we got deeper into the rehearsal period and I started working with Maggie, some things that Patrick was saying to me that I intellectually understood but emotionally hadn't kind of got to that place yet started to click in, and it really unlocked the writing for me once I was able to recognize that from his perspective and to make that choice that this man really believes himself to be the heroic center of this story. Once I was able to get out of my own way and start there, it kind of unlocked everything else. I had no concept of what being in that room meant. My only access to that is frankly watching other TV shows. I'd had some surgeons describe to me the tenor of being in those rooms, and they all described it as a workmanlike area with a forced joviality, where I think in order to get past the psychological weight of what it is that you're doing, particularly in high leverage surgeries like a spinal surgery, where if something goes wrong, it goes horribly, horribly wrong. And it was true, the surgeries that I observed, you go into this place, there is no mistaking that everybody is there for a very specific, very detailed purpose. And that's the pressure that's sitting at the base of what they're doing. And then on top of it, they're talking about music and they're having a laugh about the weekend and what are the kids up to, and they create this normalcy inside of this room, which feels anything but normal to an outside observer, I think, so that they're able to push through the weight of what they're doing. But for Dunch, obviously, it manifested itself in very, very different ways.
Son of a Dunch! What the hell was that? Red jersey means do not hurt! Are you dyslexic and colorblind?
Some of it is finding a place for the anecdotal evidence that he did actually have some sort of learning disability or cognitive deficiency, that maybe he had an aphasia about left or right, or maybe he just had an inability to process information, and under pressure he was incapable of learning from his mistake because the gear sort of grind to a halt. So wanted to put that in, but what the purpose of that scene is actually the pathological need for perfection. He can't step back and take a deep breath and analyze what he's doing, because everything that he does has to be perfect, because he's at that point hasn't quite got there, but he's on the way to building a construct of self that is, I'm perfect. I do everything right. Everything that I touch is gold, and everybody that I know loves me. And that obsessiveness, right, that blots out any contrary information, that to me was what was so great about jumping back into that portion of his life. Before you see him as the formed thing, the monster that he becomes, you see all the opportunities for off-ramps that personality had, right? And all the places where with just a little nudge in a different direction, he would have been able to potentially accept himself and then see himself, right? And in that way, be able to learn as a human being, as opposed to the direction that he went in, which obviously was catastrophic for himself and every single person he came in contact with.
We don't do craniotomies at this hospital. And you are a guest here at Dallas Medical. If one of our staff tells you we don't have privileges for a procedure, it is not an invitation for debate.
I have privileges everywhere across this city.
Oh, you do?
I will ensure that not a single patient comes through your door.
Wow, that would be so tragic.
Get the out of my OR!
From an acting standpoint, you just have to trust the writing. There's not like an additional level of intensity in your eyes just because you're sort of locked in here. But you have to trust the director, you have to trust the editor, you have to trust the sound design, which is core to all those things. And you also have to trust that the story, if you took any one of those scenes and just played it as a scene, it might be like a little gory, a little but in the context of the story, when you know the weight of what's about to happen, the stakes of that scene are already set for you. So all you have to do at that moment, or all I felt I had to do at that moment, was to trust that we had told the rest of the story. So by the time the audience gets into that room and they know, oh, this is about to go down, every glance, every gesture, every movement in that room is so heavy because you have this sense of doom just hanging over the entire scene. That's a testament to all the pieces of the show working. I think all of the toxic cross currents of our culture played into creating Dunch, right? So there's a certain reverence that we have for the position of doctor because we don't meet them in an open market situation. They have knowledge that is unknown to us and unknowable to us without training. That also happens to be sometimes the key to our survival or our continued existence in the way that we want to exist. So it's a massively unequal place. Our culture has, since its inception, and continues to be more forgiving and more rewarding of white men, and particularly tall white men in positions of authority, of a certain socioeconomic class. And so, yeah, I think he was raised inside of a very traditional and patriarchal family, so that reinforces that sense of self. So yeah, I think all of those things lead up to, I mean, he again, it's why I love that second episode so much, because it gives you that place to see the unformed version of that personality type, and hopefully see things that we can all recognize, either that we recognize in ourselves or that we recognize in people that we know of, like, man, if you can just get them right there, maybe we can get that toxic personality off that path and bring them around to the light.